Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Global Guardian, Violence in the Workplace, Effective Strategies for Prevention and Response. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You will have the opportunity to submit your questions to today's panelists by typing your questions into the Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording in a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view. I would now like to introduce our moderator, Global Guardian Executive Vice President of Client Risk Management, Brian Raymond. Brian?
Thank you, Shannon, and welcome to the Workplace Violence webinar. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, approximately 2 million Americans fall victim to workplace violence each year, an alarming statistic that underscores the urgent need for employers to act, and soon new laws may force them to. In this webinar, we will examine the significance of California's SB 553, which mandates business to develop, document, and communicate their WPV prevention plans, which other states may soon follow suit with their own laws. What does this mean for your business? Even if SB 553 does not impact your organization directly, our panel of speakers will share helpful insights and takeaways for all business leaders, including recent trends in workplace violence incidents, key components of effective workplace violence prevention plans, strategies for fostering safer work environments through mitigation, deterrence, and organizational culture, best practices to assess, detect threats before they enter the workplace, how Global Guardian can support you in keeping your workforce safe and productive. For those of you who may not be familiar with Global Guardian, we are a global security and medical support firm based just outside of Washington, D.C., with additional offices in Charlotte, North Carolina, and London. We pride ourselves in having built a network of vetted, trained, and tested local response teams in over 130 countries around the world. Global Guardian is a company that, of course, leverages technology, but we are ultimately about people helping people with a hyper-response ethos and commitment to providing options and positive outcomes for our clients. Our first panelist, Robin Welch-Stern, started her career at the Central Intelligence Agency, where she spent 5 years in the Director of Operations. She worked undercover to support intelligence gathering operations all over the world. While at the agency, she developed an expertise in insider risk and sensitive program management. In 2011, she was recruited to help start the Global Investigations Program at Google. After spending 7 years leading Google's investigations program globally, Robin built Google's world-class global workplace violence prevention program. During her 12 years at Google, she reshaped global operations on insider risk, workplace violence, threat detection and management, intelligence, investigations, and physical security, benchmarked throughout the industry. These programs remain best-in-class examples of sophisticated, high-impact corporate security. In 2023, Robin left Google to start the Pacific Resilience Group, PRG, a firm specializing in delivering end-to-end security programs for the private sector. PRG leverages decades of hands-on experience inside Fortune 500 companies to give companies modern security solutions suited to the speed and demands of business. PRG helps larger companies accelerate or enhance their existing security capabilities and partners with startups to design and deliver right-sized security programs catered to rapid growth. Our second panelist, Ray Carrera, is the Vice President of Security at A16Z, where he oversees physical security, intelligence and investigations, residential, executive security, event security, and security support to portfolio companies. Prior to joining A16Z, Ray was the head of global security at Meta, where he provided strategic direction for his event security and operations at international and domestic events. Before that, Ray worked for the Santa Clara Police Department, where he was deputized an FBI task force officer, undercover detective, crime scene investigator, and head of intelligence operations for the Special Operations Division. Ray began his career in the United States Air Force as an intelligence officer after graduating with a BS in Business Management Administration from the prestigious and oldest private military college in the nation, Norwich University. Our third panelist is Dale Buckner, is the CEO of Global Guardian and has been leading Global Guardian since its inception in March 2012. He is a directed combat commander with multiple combat tours and classified operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Colombia, Haiti, Cuba, and executed deployments to Russia, El Salvador, Honduras, Chile, Panama, Kuwait, and Qatar. Dale served the United States Army Infantry for 9 years, military intelligence for 2 years, and Special Forces Green Beret for 13 years. He commanded 5 organizations, including an infantry reconnaissance platoon, Special Forces scuba team, Special Forces counterterrorism team, and Special Forces counterterrorism task force, and a special troops battalion. Dale has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and business, master's degree in public administration and business administration, a master's certificate in strategic leadership from Cornell, and was a senior fellow at the Tufts University School of Law and Diplomacy. Dale earned a total of 27 awards and decorations, highlighted by his Combat Bronze Star Medal and Defense Meritorious Service. Our final panelist is Mike Ballard. He currently manages Global Guardian's intelligence network with international partners. He is responsible for providing clients with Global Guardian's intelligence report updates and real-time alerts. Prior to joining the Global Guardian team, Mike was the former lead intelligence analyst for the North American region at United Health Group. He holds a master's degree in international affairs from the University of Kentucky and a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Mary Washington. With that, I'll turn the presentation over to Mike Ballard.
Thank you, Brian. Next slide. So before we get started into some of the details on SB 553, I wanted to sort of highlight some of the stats, the trends, give folks a little bit of context into what do we mean by workplace violence, and I think what we tend to see mostly on the news are going to be the mass shootings. Right, there is a significant problem in the U.S. with these mass shootings, whether it's at schools or out in public or at workplaces. But if you look at some of these stats here, and we've got a list of some of the most recent and most deadly mass shootings that have taken place at places of work, you'll find that while the majority of mass shootings do not happen in workplaces, they are the most common location for mass shootings. So when we think about, something like 1.3 million incidents of workplace violence, right, a relatively small number of those are shootings, but they can have a very significant impact. So, when we're looking at workplaces, we're looking at mass shootings, you see that, most of these folks that carry these out were former employees. Most of them had been recently fired, and the other primary location beyond office buildings or those types of places are going to be retail locations, right? Places like restaurants, bars, any place where you've got they're semi-public, but they're also places where folks work. We don't include schools on this list. But school shootings are also a significant problem. Now, a lot of folks think that, someone gets fired or one day they just snap and, no one sees it coming. But the reality is that that's not really true. There are typically signs. There are typically things that folks can look for, red flags. So for us at Global Guardian, when we're thinking about, how can we help mitigate? How can we help to stop something like this from happening in the first place? There's a few things that you can do, right? You can look for some of these signs. You can do some, what we call hostile termination, threat management, right? Social media monitoring for folks who may have been recently terminated or laid off or quit, right? Do they start, talking in using threatening language on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, right? And have a plan for what you're going to do if you see some behavior like this pop up. Next slide, please. And here's I think some pretty significant and also useful data on what happens during workplace mass shootings, right? So, for us, you look at crisis signs are a big one, right? So again, it's not like someone just flips a switch one day and goes from, you'd never suspect this, right, to mass shooter where they used to work. So you've got things like, are they feeling isolated? Are they exhibiting signs of paranoia? Have they become increasingly aggressive in the past several days or weeks? Right. There are also a number of red flags that you can look at for in someone's past, right? Do they have a criminal record? Do they have a history of violence? Have they been arrested for domestic assault, domestic violence, right? Those are they're not necessarily causations, but they could be correlations, right? So these are some things to sort of, look at, think about, right? 47% of folks have a leaked plan for this at some point. So again, there are things that you can look at. There are signs that are there. And mass shootings, I think, are, obviously a big problem, but there are steps that folks can take, have a plan in place. So with that, I'll turn it over to Robin.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm here to talk about SB 553 and building effective workplace violence prevention plans. So let me give you a little bit of background on SB 553. This really brings us up to, in California, this really brings us to the medical standard. So hospitals, medical facilities have really strict laws around what has to be in a workplace violence prevention plan. So this brings us up to their standards, or at least close to. And I want to explain a little more. Mike did a great job of talking about what signs to look for and how much violence there really is, especially in the US. But I want to talk about the why and why this is important first before we go on to the details of SB 553. So one of the biggest reasons that this is important work is that you have a group that is disproportionately impacted every year by workplace violence prevention. If we're serious about retaining top talent, underrepresented groups, this is really where we have to focus. 60% of the workplace violence that happens is geared towards women. It is one of the fastest ways to lose some of your top talent if this isn't taken seriously. Domestic violence is a huge part of workplace violence. It will absolutely come to the workplace. If you look at these numbers, they're staggering. $1.171 billion annually is lost directly and indirectly due to workplace violence. So I'm going to work backwards here with these numbers. So if you have this large number, but then if you look above, it says 50% of employees are too afraid to report workplace violence. So these are just the numbers that we do know. And then if you look over to the left, 61% of employees who self-reported had experienced it 3 or more times in their lives. So this is just scratching the surface. If we have 1.3 million non-fatal crimes in the workplace every single year, but we're only seeing 50%, we're losing more money, we're losing top talent, and we're only scratching the surface here. So as a result, California came up with a law that takes effect on July 1st of this year. And it impacts every single employer with 10 or more employees in the state of California. So I get asked all the time, well, we're headquartered in Minnesota and we have 10 or more employees. We don't have to be compliant, but yes, you do. If you have any sort of footprint that has 10 or more employees in the state of California, you do have to become compliant. So I like to break it down, SB 553, I like to break down into 4 components. So you have to have a written plan. You have to have record keeping for minimum of 5 years. You have to have a violent incident log, and you have to have annual training. All of this has to happen by the 1st of July of this year. And then going forward, you have to have refresher training. You have to evaluate your plan every year. You have to make changes and then educate your employees on those changes that you've learned over the past year. Your employees have to have a way to share what they're experiencing or how they feel about the plan and any opinions they might have on the plan. You have to have a way to do that. And a sticky part here is that your annual training, including the one that has to happen by July 1st, has to be interactive. So you can't just have some online training that ends in a quiz. You have to have someone available to answer questions on the specific plan. Next slide, please. So SB 553 is wide ranging, and it is a robust law that is going to take a lot of time to become compliant. One of the interesting things that it does is it actually makes you look at 4 types of violence. You have to categorize anything that happens into one of these types. So if you look at this, usually workplace violence prevention is thought of as um, something that happens internally necessarily with someone who is fired, but this could also be a customer who's unhappy, someone who thinks they were owed money. If you look at the YouTube shooting that happened in 2018, that was not an employee, that was someone who came onto campus and shot a number of people. Type 4 violence is one of your most common, and companies tend to shy away from this. This is acts of violence committed in the workplace by a person who does not work there. So think intimate partner. I had mentioned that domestic violence will absolutely come to the workplace. We've seen last year, we had a terrible shooting in Berkeley, California, where an ex-intimate partner came to the workplace and killed his former intimate partner. So we're going to have to, as employers, we're going to have to get involved in these cases that we've typically kind of shied away from. The other thing that is interesting about the law is it includes any verbal or written statement, including text, electronic messages, social media messages, or online posts. So just quickly, what this means is, let's say you have 2 employees who aren't getting along. And at the end of one day, a third employee notices that one of the employees said, on social media, "I've had it, this is all I can take." End of story, no pictures, just that line. If this third employee feels like that is a threat, psychologically, physically, you have to investigate that, and you have to record it, and you have to look into it. For those of us with a lot of employees, this can cause heartburn. Psychological trauma is in here. So also, this includes the office, remote workers, your vendor partners, work events, work travel. This is all inclusive of that. So you're going to need to think about psychological trauma and physical trauma when you're building this program. Next slide, please. So I am personally really excited about SB 553. As Brian had mentioned, I built Google's workplace violence prevention program. And before you think, oh, it was Google, we threw a bunch of money at it. Not true. We did it in a way that was really scrappy, but became a world-class program. All of these things are really important. SB 553 sets the stage into building a program that retains top talent, protects your workforce, and really allows your company to thrive. So here's what I recommend. If you're going to build a workplace violence prevention program, here's what I recommend doing. So first, you want executive buy-in, which we talked about a little bit today and how important that is. You want to align with executives on resources and your objectives. Now, number 2, internal partners. This is my favorite. You need everyone in on this. You need HR to have a seat at the table, security, ER, legal. And the way I was able to do this and have been able to do this with clients is you want to put the benefits up front. So instead of telling security or HR, hey, you have to do this, this is a law, you want to help them see that they're already working these cases. We're just now going to do it in the best way possible. We're going to have experts. We're going to learn what the warning signs are. And we're going to be this little army behind you that can help prevent violence and can really help your company thrive. So everybody wants a seat at the table, but also when you bring such a different group together, everybody has really interesting ideas and sees things a different way. And that's what you want. With workplace violence prevention, you want every piece of the puzzle to come in to play here. So how many times have we heard after a shooting, oh, I knew that person was bad news. I knew they were going to do something horrible. You want everybody looking at this because everybody has a different piece of the pie, even if they even if they think that they don't, they do. And you want all information in being discussed when you're looking at level of risk and mitigation steps. Number three, don't try to do this alone. If you are in security and you're a one-person show, don't try to do this alone. You need your HR, ER, legal partners. You need a bench of third-party experts to look at this. Please don't try to do this alone. My saying in security is never do anything alone, even if it's not workplace violence prevention, because you will absolutely miss something. You need to understand the culture, where you're going. So I've set the program I set up at Google operated in all of the regions, and cases look different in every region. So make sure that you understand the differences. Proactive detection, data management, and operating at scale is huge. Ray will talk a little bit more about the technology, but you really do want to make sure that you're housing your data in a good place where you can pull stats, where you can see trends, and you want to be able to operate at scale instead of sort of fixing it as you go along. And continuous evolution. You're never done with this work. This is something that you have to study the trends and look at how people are feeling about the program. You need to constantly chat with your partners in security, HR, legal. How is this working for you? What are you seeing? And you want to continuously evolve, which SB 553 forces us to, because we have to reevaluate the written plan every single year, and you have to train on it. And that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Ray, who's going to talk about some really cool things in technology and workplace violence prevention.
Thank you, Robin. Appreciate that. You said several things here that we are very excited about. I mean, SB 553 can be daunting and be looked upon as a big, heavy lift for corporate security leaders, but I'm actually quite optimistic about it. It's an opportunity for chief security officers or security heads out there to re-engage their executives and re-engage their internal partners and talk about how corporate security is fundamentally changed this past year for everyone. The new tools, the new technology, I think it's the most exciting time for anyone to be in corporate security because we have new ways to combat this violence. We have new ways to actually prevent this violence. We're seeing such shifts, monumental shifts in tools for AI cameras where if you have a corporate violence incident, whether it's at a school, whether it's at one of your campuses, all these indicators can be distributed, such as if a suspicious car comes to your perimeter and somebody steps out in a trench coat and somebody takes out a weapon, then they start walking to a door that's not locked down. All these can be distributed to your entire workforce, and you can actually prevent the violence before it happens. So that's something that can be distributed at scale, and that intelligence can be shared amongst all your key stakeholders and all your people to protect your employees, your brand, your company in such better ways we haven't seen before. And most importantly, as members of our community, it's an impact we can have in our schools. So I implore people to take a true look at this as an opportunity to look at ways you can deploy tech to make that program as a whole more effective. And that goes back to one of your key things that you said about internal partners. It's so I want to focus on obviously the tech and then the different models that you can deploy to meet the requirements, then have true tactically relevant intelligence to make a difference. So it all starts with an intelligence program where the optimized intelligence flow is shared with everybody. And when I say everybody, your key partners, your CISO for the internal, your HR, your legal, all of your men and women at the office is employed in other areas that have a role in security. And I would argue that everybody has a role in security for it to truly be effective. But that optimized intelligence flow where you get, whether it's a threat online or somebody walks into your office and makes overt threats, how is that information stored, housed, cataloged, and investigated? And then more importantly, is it distributed in a timely fashion that somebody can act upon it? So that's a key part right there, is how is that information put into the right platform? How is it distributed? And most people will come back to us and say, well, I might not have the funding for that. But if you look at different platforms that you're using every day, whether it's, your Microsoft Teams or your Slack or your ways you communicate, you can find different ways of feeding that information into a database and have that investigated in a meaningful way and still comply with documenting and investigating on a routine basis those threats. And then I'd also say that one of the things that we are most excited about too is that we're seeing not just with the tools, but like the cameras and other things that you can deploy in AI. I would argue that as a chief security officer, every single part of your day can be more efficient and effective, right down to writing the policy for SB 553. What might have taken an individual 3 4 hours to go through all of the law and everything. I mean, it's literally using ChatGPT to help form the basis of your policy, and then you going back in and rewriting it and customizing it. You're now a more effective leader because you're using AI in your policy, you're using AI in your executive protection. I think that we're very, very close to our executive protection agents out in the field being able to talk into whatever communication platform, leveraging all their databases from a large language model and having that cutting edge, tactically relevant intelligence while they're in the field. Whereas traditionally all that is housed in a GSOC or housed by an intelligence function. So we're seeing that AI deployed across every aspect of the corporate security model is going to make people extremely efficient, extremely effective. Truly, in my estimation, I know wholeheartedly that the AI vision and the AI cameras can save lives, and it's here today. We're seeing that people are using it, and it should be deployed as a part of SB 553 to be truly innovative. And if you're not using those tools afforded to you today and what's coming down the line, I think those corporate organizations are going to fall behind of a truly world-class program. So I hope that kind of amplified a lot of what Robin was talking about as far as the partnerships, the proactive ways to detect. And there's different models that we're clearly seeing are very, very effective and actually more efficient than others, even with a lot less people, because you can take, even with a team of, 5 or 6 women who have spent, you know, 25, 30 years of their career in different fields, you can take their collective expertise and put that into the model with the matrix, with the cameras or the other tools you're deploying. And all of a sudden, you're 5 times more effective than just one person. It's the same way AI can affect bringing the wealth and experience of 100 doctors working on one problem into one model. And that's what we're seeing, because I can customize cameras based on what I saw in a terrorist event in Spain. I can customize cameras based on a bad actor behavior at a school shooting or like the VTA shooting in San Jose that was mentioned earlier. All those things can be a community where people come together and we build these open source models and put those into our tools to make our offices and our campuses safer. And we can do that right now. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Ray. Next slide. So we're right at 11:29 Eastern Standard Time. So we're right on schedule. We try and break this 30 minutes and 30 minutes. I'll be brief here. Number one, I think as you look at something tangible for all of you in the audience today, you'll get a copy of this deck. Slide 12 from Robin is your yellow brick road. I thought that was an incredibly effective and powerful slide where you have something tangible you can leave this briefing with that can help you outline how you move forward. And two, with Ray, I think just outlining how fast tech is moving, what you can do with cameras, and everyone is watching to see where AI goes, as everyone is talking about this. I think really interesting to think about those principles and how this moves forward. And a lot of the stovepiping and the analog of yesterday being a chief security officer, HR, is going to really look very different over the next 3 to 5 years. It's going to change very quickly. As you look at the slide itself, number one, I think workplace violence being on the rise, it's not going away. It's a very obvious statement. I think when you think about the fabric of the United States and how the lack of trust in institutions, inability to actually have appropriate number of police, EMS, fire, and what's going on in our society post-COVID, this simply is going to be a bigger part of the workplace. It's not going anywhere. So as Robin described, I think you have to lean in. You've got to bring your team together and don't try and do this yourself. Two, Mike talked about it. Most of the shooters have been fired. Obviously, tracking that from a data standpoint and creating a system and a red flag to trigger some monitoring of that and using information and technology will be key and part of this, as Ray described. And then as you look at SB 553, I am going to live this. As I'm running a firm, the footprint in California has grown exponentially in the last 3 years. Everything listed here, I have to now comply with. So I'm living this like most of you. If I'm living this and I'm thinking through it, that roadmap Robin gave and what Ray just described is clearly the way forward. It's the middle or tending towards the end of March. We have till July. We're going to have to move fast, and we haven't started. So we're in the same boat as most of you. And as I look at this, everything they described, as you look at those 4 key bullet points, the requirements that Robin laid out, there's no way that a kind of paper manual way, especially at scale, is going to work. The record keeping is going to have to be automated. The annual training is going to have to be formulated and meet the standard. It's going to have backing from the C-suite, and all of the written plan and the log itself will have to be automated and have visibility across the key leaders into the firm. So as you think about these things, you're really going to have to lean into this. And I would expect, as with a lot of things in the United States, since California has broken this dam, I would imagine over the next, call it 36 months, that you'll see another 10 to 15 states have a requirement like this. It will spread. Where and how fast, no one really knows. But without question, this SB 55 like program will spread from state to state. It is part of our fabric, and it is going to move forward and kind of metastasize across not only in the United States, but there will be versions of this internationally without question, as you think through that globally. And then as you look at it, we kind of reiterate on these stats. I saw some questions, Brian, we get to Q&A. Some of the stats were questioned about, what is this timeline to that timeline. Mike Ballard can come back and clarify any of those key questions and where those stats came from, and what the criteria were. Everything with data, of course, can be manipulated by the criteria. Ultimately, the last bullet on there, I'll reiterate, and this is really the red flag, and do you have a system to track this and then create a bit of an alarm? 47% leaked their plan prior to the assault. The first time I read that, I knew it would be high, but I didn't anticipate that it would be almost half of the attacks are kind of pushed out there in some form or shape on our known. It is a very alarming stat to think that almost half of these things are out there prior to their occurrence, which just goes back to utilizing the right system, the right data, the right tech, and then having the right SOP, if you will, to respond. My very last comment, and we'll move to Q&A, the best part of this, and we have a full 25 minutes left, is all of these things that we've talked about today are primarily on the front end. We're trying to be preventive. I think in corporate America, we're quite good at being preventive for the most part. The question or the issue I see in corporate America is when it does go bad, we're not so great. And I think that last piece of this, as you think of all the things that we are all going to have to do as we face this challenge, is we'll do all the work on the front end. The real question will be, do you have a really good plan and do you train to when it does go bad? And I think that's where we're weak, and it's always the hardest part of this, if you will. So as much time and effort as we spend on the front end, there's got to be an acknowledgement of the back end when these things do occur and you can't stop them. So I'll pause there. That was a great discussion. We've got a full 25 minutes for Q&A. I'll hand it back to Brian.
Hey, thank you, Dale. As you highlighted, this is some of the most valuable information out there from the audience. We had a really nice thread there going for about 5 or 6 different questions. And Robin, I'll start with you. Since COVID, obviously there was that massive dispersion of our workforce. Does this law or that engagement, how does a firm approach that? Are they responsible? Does it translate into the workforce that may be remote?
Yeah, I saw a lot of these questions popping up. So ultimately, you do need to talk to your legal counsel about how much risk your company is willing to take on. This is what I do. I build these programs for companies all over. So you can always reach out and I can help answer these questions more directly, because as Dale stated, these plans really need to be directed at your company. So what I will say about remote workers is, in this day and age, remote workers are hardly in a silo 100% of the time, meaning they don't travel, they never set foot in an office, they do not engage with customers physically, or where a customer could see some sort of workplace violence. So we just don't work in a vacuum, especially since COVID. We are touching other people without ever leaving the confines of our home. So you need to talk to your legal counsel about how much risk you're willing to take on. If you want to call your remote employees, teleworkers that never come into the office, never see a customer face to face, talk to your legal counsel about that.
Okay, great. And just to kind of pivot on that and to capture two birds here, if the company has 10 plus employees, all remote in California, but no physical footprint, does that now make them have to be compliant?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, that's a great touch on that. Thank you. Answered your question. Ray, I have a question for you. What do you see as the biggest challenge or the biggest obstacle when small startups? Obviously, you touch a very interesting space. Companies are moving quickly and expanding rapidly. What are some of the challenges, and maybe how should people go ahead and prioritize how they engage this?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, Robin came from Google, and there's a lot of resources to tap into, although it was a scrappy program. And I came from places where we had a lot of resources. But in reality, there's so many people who are in the startup world or entrepreneur world, and they don't even have a security representative, and they're a bit overwhelmed. But they do fall in that category where they have so many employees and they have to stay within compliance. So sometimes they'll reach out within their network, and they'll talk to other security professionals. How do I do this? They'll reach out to companies that can provide these services, and usually it comes upon either the HR or the legal rep who has to figure out a solution. Our advice to them is always to reach out to a reputable company who can provide these services, and it can be managed through a vendor, and then they can become compliant until they reach a threshold where it's very clear that they need to hire a security professional to manage these vendors who do these services for them. I mean, we do see a plethora of companies that have maybe a small security cell, and that small security cell of global leaders will manage an array of different vendors who meet all these different requirements in different ways. And that's in a very, very effective model. And as I mentioned earlier, I see that model come into life where you can have a small cadre of people who are leveraging all the right tools, and the vendors are doing these functions for them while they get to focus on truly what they are good at. It's almost everybody is getting up leveled several different tiers because of the technology and the AI out there today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dale, obviously we've had some pretty interesting events, and certainly your time of growing this company the last 12 years. What's the message to the group about basically, obviously we can incorporate tech, we can do all the programs. When someone reaches out and you've usually touched CEOs or very high level individuals at a firm after the event, what's your message to the group about just basically how to prioritize and how to approach somebody to give them assistance potential prior to a malign event?
Yeah, no, we see a lot of this. Unfortunately, we've been involved in several mass shootings at corporate headquarters. And we're on the front end where we are preventive. And when there are mass firings, we're part of that process and presence. And then we are monitoring social media platforms and different workplace platforms that we're allowed to monitor for several weeks to months after people are released. And we're kind of targeting folks that have certain profiles. That's on the front end. On the back end, as I described, my last comment is I think we're all talking about being preventive today. What we miss often is the fact that your poorly trained, high turnover, unarmed guard force is ill prepared for an actual active shooter. What we find is your workforce is not prepared for EMS, fire, and police to come rushing into the building. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to act, and they don't know how to posture themselves when police show up. And these things, they sound basic, and it sounds like you could just put this out in a policy note or a VTC or a video. It's just simply not enough, and it doesn't work. So we've seen that over and over and over again. And then my last comment is, let's assume for some of you, if you've had an active shooter or an incident like this at the workplace, what we've seen is for anywhere between 2 to 6 months after that event, in order to gain confidence of your workforce to come in and out of that facility, whether it's 2, 3 days a week or it's 5 days a week, so on and so forth, we have found that a real presence that is very vibrant, very open, very obvious to everyone has to be in place to garner your employee base's trust again. We've talked about this with other webinars, having 2 to 3,000 people enter a facility every day and getting their trust back after an event like this. It takes a lot of presence and that kind of showcasing to your employee base that you are prepared for this and that there is an obvious force prepared for that. And that can't come again from the high turnover, unarmed, poorly trained guard force. It's just not enough. So the combination of technology and real skill set and real security presence after the fact is a really, really important part of this.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dale, if I could add to what you said there,
Please.
Dale, back in my time in law enforcement, it was very obvious the companies and corporations who did there's a big delineation between those who met with law enforcement and the fire department when things were quiet, invited them to the office, showed them around, asked for their feedback, and it didn't cost that corporate security leader anything. And when times of crisis happen, it was not the first time that first responders were going to that place, and they were prepared to open doors, prepared to lead them to the medical emergency or the workplace violence incident. That goes a tremendous long way, and it's an easy thing you can do today.
Couldn't agree more.
No, that's great stuff. Mike Ballard, you and I and everyone else, all hours, days and nights, right? So you're talking about predictive engagement. Obviously, technology is giving us the opportunity to do so. What's your message to the audience about if they need support, if they want a second set of eyes, what's the best practices? Because you and I have worked on many cases where we do see that basically indications and warning, right? And we're looking at social media, and as you pointed out in those really good statistics, people are projecting, they're reaching out, they're almost in some cases now almost filming themselves as they go through their process. Any good tips for the audience today?
Yeah, for us, the main thing that we're doing, sort of on the desktop side is going to be that kind of hostile termination, social media monitoring. So an example, we had a client who had to let somebody go for some erratic behavior. We discovered their Instagram account, and they were posting photos of a background check that they were having to go through in order to purchase a Glock, and pictures of them at the shooting range with some very passive aggressive but still threatening language tied to it, right? And he wasn't purchasing this firearm illegally, right? He was jumping through all the right hoops, but this gave the client a lot of cause for concern. And right, so we, a combination of monitoring the social media feeds with having someone on site, right, a bolo, be on lookout, right? You have a photo of the individual, noting that they're, not allowed back on property. If they do, you'd have a plan in place, right? Contact the authorities, and all that. So for us, it's sort of a dual, right? It's monitoring, but also have some action, and have a plan.
Brian, I have something I'd like to add
Yes,
here.
please, please, please.
The theme here that we're hitting on is that we shouldn't be done with employees until really they're done with us. So if you have a termination or you have someone who's displaying erratic behavior, this is not the time to just cut and run. There's a lot of monitoring that has to happen, meeting with the employee while you can to assess their behavior, working with your experts on what you're seeing. But just because you terminate an employee doesn't mean that they're done with you and that the threat's over. So we really want to take the time to engage while we can and look at the situation as a
That's a
whole.
wonderful comment. When we often support those type of engagements for our clients, especially for high threat termination, we always have that conversation. Like, okay, we got through the event. Now what's going to happen the next week? That's really great. So I just got some input from the webinar overseers at Global Guardian. We have amazing engagement today, more than we have seen in a long time. That's a testament to our panelists. We're going to basically, what we're going to do is we're going to follow up separately with Robin and the panelists to get you your questions back after that. And so that's a great thing. So I'm not going over the questions. I'm trying to do the best I can in the time we have. I want to pivot back to some sort of, I think it's really important, especially for you, Robin, at Google, and then Ray, with your companies. Obviously, you're international. What are some of the challenges, real quick, about how that works? Because the EU or certain countries in there have different guidelines and protocols through the US. What are some of the best practices to sort of get that larger engagement? Because ultimately, you may be responsible for those individuals overseas.
Yeah, I can speak to this and then turn it over to Ray. So, like I said before, you want to get buy-in early, and so you want to put the benefits up front. So I saw the question, something like, how do you convince, for example, Europeans that this isn't just an American problem?
Exactly.
You don't want to go into it with an American outlook. You want to look at the region, even the country that you're dealing with, and look at the stats there. You want to see, is the country experiencing more self-harm? Are they experiencing more family violence, which is something you might see more in APAC than in other places in the world? So that's a form of violence, family violence. In Europe, for example, we saw way more self-harm. And that's what I see with clients, and that's what I saw at Google in Europe. So you want to really know your country, you want to know your region and what you are up against, and not just take the mass shooting cookie cutter approach.
Thank you. Ray?
No, I couldn't agree with that more, because it goes back to intelligence led. So if your office in London is experiencing different intelligence set of problems than you are in New York City, then you're going to customize the deployment of security resources to that region. And you'll be a more effective and efficient security leader, because you're identifying we don't need to have maybe an armed response in this region like we do over here. And obviously the laws in different regions, whether it's GDRP or other areas where you operate with business, you might not be able to deploy everything you want to. So it's got to be highly customized. And it comes back to, my philosophy is we have to stay laser focused on those threats. And in other regions where I might not be able to deploy as much security resources as we'd like to see, then I'm going to lean a lot heavier on our CISO or our internal, or lean a lot heavier on our investigative and intelligence scraping for threats in those regions. And maybe we just don't, operate in certain fashions that you normally would. You make some adjustments to the event security, you make some adjustments to the executive protection security based on your intelligence profile for that region.
I would say too that nothing will lose an audience or stakeholders faster than trying to export active shooter training in Europe, for example. That is the fastest way to lose stakeholders.
Dale, it's Brian. You've advised hundreds of CEOs across the globe. What are some of the key points that you make when they're looking for basically how to move out and how to engage and then how to approach the problem?
Yeah, I think very simply at that level, the message is very simple. Number one, in the United States, this is only going to get bigger and worse. I think most CEOs are coming to that conclusion as you watch what's happening in the United States, let alone the conflicts around the world. That will get, stakeholders attention, leadership attention. Two, we are also connected now that the reputational risk to a firm for not being prepared, not having some kind of real plan and preparation for these things, and then how you respond. The communication out to society and the general public in general now matters. So I think the messaging there at the very senior level is just, you can't ignore this. It's real. You can feel what's happening in societies around the world, and that this can put your brand at risk. Those two things at the very most senior level of a firm will resonate. It will get senior leaders' attention. And look, I fully comprehend, and Ray's kind of hit on this several times. All of us out there in the HR, chief security officer, CISO world, we have budgets, we have constraints, we have bureaucracy. We have to fight, and pick our battles where we're going to really push for resources. As you think about a topic like this, when you bring it to a stakeholder and say, this is not going away, it's potentially worse, and it can damage our firm, you'll get people's attention. And that really is the messaging.
Thank you. This is a good entry for both Robin and Ray, because you've actually done it. You've probably performed it. Is this training, this engagement? I mean, prior to COVID, it was very common that we visited our clients in person and we had, hours set aside and we engaged. Of course, COVID took us a whole nother direction, 4 years ago. Just basically your perspective of, I mean, obviously you can have a hybrid, but where do you find the most impact when you do engage your workforce, or in your case, Robin, now for the client side?
I would say that the biggest benefit that I have seen with clients and at Google was people just learning about the program, because it really shows that your company cares about them. Oftentimes people feel alone, or what do I do if something like this happens? I'm seeing this all over the news. But when they find out that a company cares enough to intervene if an employee is impacted by domestic violence or if they're being bullied, people thrive. It's a psychological boost. So I would say that that's one of the best parts of it. And just to piggyback on something someone just said, it doesn't have to be expensive, even with an expert. You can do these programs in a scrappy, economical way, but sharing what you're doing with the company keeps people safe, and it really improves morale with your employees.
Thank you. Right.
Yeah, from the training aspects, there's several dynamic benefits to it. And we were just involved in training recently where it's very key to make it an environment if you can do it in person, because people seem to be more open in person in that sort of setting. And what I find is that if we expose people to what might happen after an incident, the psychological impact of that traumatic event will typically be lower because we've already conditioned the people to that problem. So they will typically react better in the times of stress. The negative impact is typically lower. I think that was one of the questions in the thread there, with the psychological impacts of these traumatic events. So conditioning people to react and behave a certain way yields such great results. The other great thing about the training for this program in person, I saw this in stadium security working in our efforts to safeguard the 49ers stadium, was when we had roundtable on training like this, some of the best suggestions for our security program came from non-security professionals who actually came and presented, hey, this is the best way to do a mass casualty response to get people to safety. And it was brilliant. So I would encourage all those security professionals implementing this program to open it up to people and make it very interactive. So that was one of the other questions popping up now. How do you make it interactive? And basically professing that we don't have all the answers to the best solution, but we want your input. And you'll typically have people come forward and say, hey, I wasn't going to report this on Zoom, or I wasn't going to talk to you about this, but this is happening. It's not really a work thing, but it's a personal thing. And then you find out, oh, it will impact our brand or our people, our offices. We do have to help this person investigate this or report them, help them report it to the proper authorities. And then we start tracking that and start putting up defenses and how we can mitigate a potential incident of violence.
Thank you, Ray. Robin, one question I'm looking at, and I think this is important across the board, is does the law or the engagement also include places of worship across the board and for California? How do they address?
Yes, it absolutely does. It impacts all employers except law enforcement and the medical community.
Except law enforcement, medical company. Good. This is interesting. I thought I'd touch on the healthcare. Coming from the healthcare sector, it seems this requirement mirrors SB 1299, the healthcare workplace violence. I see out the corner of my eye you nodding, Robin, so which is great. Does any of you have any insight as to building a plan similar to healthcare and hospital on that? Is there overlap or crossover there, or are they two distinct issues?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you repeat the last part of it?
It says, do you have any insight or comments as to building a plan similar with care or within the hospital community?
Yeah, I mean, they have such high standards, so it's great to aim that high. But you know, we should focus on SB 553 compliance because that's going to be tough between now and July 1st. Hopefully that answers the question.
This is important, I believe, especially if coming from both of you who have been inside, and then for Ray especially, is there seems to be a lot of provisions within this new law or engagement that protects the employee. Obviously, that's a good thing. But is there anything that really disadvantages the provider, the company, from protecting their investigations? Is there any big disadvantages you've seen? And Ray, maybe you could comment on that after Robin on how you approach that.
Disadvantages.
Well, not a disadvantage, but someone is basically doing an investigation. They want to be able to go ahead and protect their engagement, especially if it's leading up to termination.
Yeah. Ray, can you think of anything that would be a disadvantage with this?
Well, I think you're getting at it goes back to the second point on her slide, that is internal partners. Right. And so that is the most delicate part of internal threats. If all those pre-incident indicators are there, you start to see OSINT, you start to see your intelligence tools start giving you red flags. Obviously, your number one thing you have to do is convene with your legal and your HR team and follow your respective, because I envision a lot of this coming as a subset or addendum to existing workplace manuals or playbooks for companies. And so HR will take that head on, and legal will take the sensitivities of your teams that may or may not have to conduct an internal investigation to potential workplace violence. I've seen over the last several years, I mentioned in Silicon Valley, I've seen companies who are way ahead of this years ago and actually engage law enforcement early and ask them to even be in the room in a plainclothes or detective capacity for high-risk firings, and then work in concert with law enforcement and detectives to carry that investigation on long after the employee left. So there's different strategies for that I think are very effective. And you have to have that trust with your cross-functional partners to carry those investigations in a sensitive manner.
Yeah, I would say the benefits of sharing information with your partners far outweigh the dangers of keeping it too close hold.
Thank you. Well, what a great hour. I want to thank everyone today, and I want to thank our attendees as well for blowing up the message link, which is outstanding. As promised, we will follow those up and get you the answers that you requested. You will receive follow-up emails, including links to the video, recording, and briefing slides. I want to thank Robin Welch Stearns, Ray Carrera, Dale Buckner, and Mike Ballard for their input and commentary today. We hope to see you soon at our next webinar. Appreciate everybody coming today. Take care.
Thank you.